Good evening to this new tutorial in the series of the Restart tutorials. And this evening we have Marco Baldi, who will present his talk about transition to post-quantum cryptography, state-of-the-art and open challenges. Marco Baldi received his laureate degree in electronic engineering summa cum laude in 2003 and his PhD in electronic, computer and telecommunications engineering in 2006, with a thesis entitled Quasi-cyclic low-density parity check codes and their application to cryptography from Marche Politecnica University. Since 2019, he is associate professor in telecommunications at the Department of Information Engineering of UniPM, where he also takes part in the Research and Service Center for Privacy and Cybersecurity. He is a member of the Management Committee of the CINI Cybersecurity National Laboratory and coordinates its local node at Università Politecnica delle Marche. He is founding member and scientific committee member of the National Cryptological Association, De Componendis Cifris. On November 19, 2020, he achieved a national scientific habilitation as full professor in telecommunication, and on February 2003, achieved a national scientific habilitation as full professor in computer science. His research activity concerns communication reliability and security, with focus on coding and post-quantum cryptography. He is co-author of over 2,000 scientific papers, appeared in international journals, book chapters, and conference proceedings, 1 book and 4 patents. He is a member of IIT, CINI, CNIT, GTTE, and IEEE Communication Society, Information Theory Society, and IEEE Senior Member. He has been Vice Chair for the period 2021-2033, and is Chair for the period 2024-2025 of the IEEE Information Theory Society Italian chapter. So I welcome this tutorial and leave the floor to our speaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Verticale, for this detailed introduction, and thank you everyone for attending this tutorial. My aim is to provide a sufficiently detailed overview of post-quantum cryptography and of the transition to post-quantum cryptography, which is the stage in which we are now, basically. So for this to be introduced, we need to quickly speak about quantum computing, which, as we all know, is a quantum computer is a computer exploiting quantum phenomena for making computations. In particular, there are some quantum mechanics phenomena which are quantum superposition and quantum correlation, which apparently are suitable for performing calculations. And this was already devised by 2 important physics researchers, Yuri Manin and Richard Feynman, in the 80s. And when they theorized the quantum computer. And basically the idea was, to make it very simple, to exploit quantum superposition to define a quantum alternative of the bit, which is called a qubit, and which has this special property of exploiting superposition for keeping the 2 logical states at the same time. And indeed, there are some functions that can be executed with qubits in a quantum superposition state. In particular, indeed, there are several functions and algorithms that could be accelerated by a quantum computer. We are especially interested in 2 of them. The first one was introduced by Peter Shor in 1994, and it is an algorithm running on a quantum computer for making integer factorization. And Shor showed that with a quantum computer and this algorithm, a large integer number can be factorized in a time which becomes polynomial in the logarithm of the number. While with the classical computer, we basically need a time which is exponential in the logarithm, because we resort to algorithms that are similar to brute force. We can do better than brute force, but not so better. And 2 years later, Grover introduced another important quantum algorithm for accelerating the search for an item inside an unsorted list by using a quantum computer. And with the Grover algorithm, you can find one item in a list which is not sorted in a time which is proportional to the square root of the number of entries of the list. While in the classical setting, we basically need again brute force. We can do slightly better than brute force, but the number of attempts we need is in the order of the elements we have in the list. So with quantum computers, we can do some very amazing things, and we can accelerate some very important tasks. However, quantum computers were basically a theoretical idea until the 19th century. Then in 2000s, in particular in 2007, a Canadian company called The Wave produced the first prototype of a quantum processor. Well, to be honest, that processor exploited quantum annealing instead of quantum superposition. So it was not so general as the quantum computer theorized by Richard Feynman and Yuri Manin. However, with quantum annealing, there are some important algorithms that can be executed as well. And the Wave started producing quantum computers based on annealing, also on a commercial scale. Starting 2011 and ongoing, they developed several relatively big quantum computers based on annealing, up to 2,000 qubits. However, later on in 2020, IBM announced the first commercial quantum computer using quantum superposition, which is the general phenomenon Richard Feynman and Yuri Manin were looking for. At that time, the quantum computer had only 20 qubits, which is extremely few. However, the race started at that time, and in 2019, Google had also claimed that the Sycamore processor with 53 qubits could outperform the best computer in the world. And then in 2020, a startup called IonQ announced the quantum computer with 32 qubits and very low error rates. Basically, the noise problem is probably the biggest problem in developing large-scale quantum computers. And this was an important contribution. And then in 2020, in China, the University of Science and Technology announced a quantum computer called the Jiuzhang with 76 qubits, exploiting photons instead of superconducting materials like all the others. And then in 2022, IBM announced a 433 qubit processor called Osprey. In 2023, Jiuzhang 3.0 was announced with 255 photons and so on and so forth, until the last claim by IBM stating that a 1,000 and more qubits quantum computer was under development. So basically, today we can say we have quantum computers. We have practical quantum computers, even if they are still not large-scale quantum computers. And what's the problem now? Well, with quantum computers, we can do some amazing stuff, and we can solve very important problems. But unfortunately, among these problems, there are some mathematical problems on which our digital security relies today. In particular, most widespread cryptographic systems we use today are based on mathematical problems that can be efficiently solved with a quantum algorithm, like Shor's algorithm in particular. For example, RSA is an asymmetric encryption scheme using integer factorization. So the security of RSA relies on the hardness of integer factorization. And RSA is basically everywhere. Is in our online banking systems, in ATMs, and so on and so forth. And also El Gamal is another asymmetric crypto system using discrete logarithms. So El Gamal is secure as long as the discrete logarithm problem is difficult to solve. And also DSA, the digital signature algorithm, relies on the hardness of discrete logarithms. And also Diffie-Hellman, which is everywhere, is a key exchange protocol based on discrete logarithms, and we use it in contactless payments and many other applications. And unfortunately, also elliptic curves becomes vulnerable because of quantum-based attacks. For example, we use elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman in our end-to-end encryption every day in Signal, in WhatsApp, in Facebook Messenger, and many other direct messaging tools and communication tools. And also digital signatures based on elliptic curves become vulnerable. And this is particularly unfortunate because we use those signatures in blockchains and distributed ledger technologies. For example, Bitcoin and Ethereum rely on digital signatures based on elliptic curves. And so they are no longer secure when a quantum computer large enough will be available. What can we do then? How we can defend against a quantum attack? Well, the natural reasoning could seem to resort to quantum cryptography, because we could think that if we have an attacker with a quantum computer, we need a defender with some quantum technology as well. Indeed, quantum cryptography exists. And in particular, we have quantum key distribution as the most known instance of quantum cryptography. However, unfortunately, quantum key distribution is not a reliable solution against quantum computer-based attacks. In fact, it is only a partial solution because it has serious limitations when used in practice. From the theoretical standpoint, quantum key distribution enjoys theoretically perfect confidentiality. But from the practical standpoint, it has serious limitations. Basically, the applicability is as poor as the one of the one-time pad. Moreover, in quantum key distribution, we have also distance constraints, which are added on top of the limitations of the one-time pad. And this is now publicly claimed by very important institutions like the American National Security Agency, the German Federal Office for Information Security, or the English National Cybersecurity Center, and many others in Europe. So these are technical statements about the limitations of quantum key distribution. So what could we do for defend against a quantum computer-based attack? Well, we can rely on post-quantum cryptography, which indeed provides a total defense against quantum computer-based attacks. Because with post-quantum cryptography, we have a key exchange, but we also have all the other necessary functions for secure communications. We also have encryption, and we also have digital signatures. Moreover, traditional systems can be upgraded with the use of post-quantum cryptography, because post-quantum cryptography doesn't need quantum hardware or quantum communications. It can be implemented on traditional hardware and can be integrated into existing security systems and protocols. And moreover, we have standardization processes and certification processes for post-quantum cryptography. So there are certified hardware and software tools that are already beginning to be available for implementing post-quantum cryptography and integrating it into existing systems. So what's post-quantum cryptography? Basically, we need, first of all, we need asymmetric crypto systems which could replace the quantum vulnerable ones. And all the most widespread we have now, like RSA, El-Gamal, Diffie-Hellman, elliptic curves, need to be replaced, totally replaced by others, relying on difficult problems that remain difficult even in the presence of a quantum attacker. Fortunately, there are some families of mathematical problems that remain hard even under a quantum attack. For example, we have those based on lattice-based problems, code-based problems relying on coding theory. We have problems based on multivariate polynomials, based on hash functions, and also others like isogenies between elliptic curves and others. For what concerns symmetric schemes, we must say that we can still use symmetric ciphers we have today, for example, AES, for example, hash functions, on condition that we take the Grover's algorithm into account. So we need to update, basically we need to increase the key length by about twice. And this is because Grover's algorithm provides a quadratic speed up. So it is not dramatic like Shor's algorithm. And we can take it into account by increasing by twice the secret key size or the hash digest size, and still continue using the symmetric systems that we have today. But for the asymmetric ones, the situation is definitely more critical. We need to replace them with new ones. And for this purpose, NIST, the American National Institute for Standards and Technology, has started the process for selecting and standardizing new cryptographic primitives for asymmetric encryption, for key exchange, and for digital signatures that are able to resist quantum-based attacks as well. The first call was published in 2016. And then 1 year later, 69 submissions were accepted and admitted to the first round. Then in 2019, the first round was finished and the second round was started with 26 algorithms. And then in 2020, the second round was closed and the third round was started with 15 algorithms. And eventually on July 2022, 4 algorithms have been announced for standardization, and a fourth round was started to keep on selecting 4 other algorithms that were admitted to the fourth round. And then on March last month, one of these 4 algorithms was selected to be added to the first 4 to be standardized. So what are the requirements? Basically, we need public key encryption according to NIST. So algorithms that can perform key generation, encryption, and decryption for messages that are at least 256 bits long. Then we need the key encapsulation. So we need algorithms for key generation, encapsulation, and decapsulation of secret keys of at least 256 bits. And then we also need the digital signatures. So we need algorithms for performing key generation, signature generation, and signature verification for a message size up to 2 raised to the 63 bits. And these are the security levels suggested by NIST. So they are basically 5, but they can be grouped into 3 groups. Levels number 1 and 2 basically coincide with the 128-bit security. Levels number 3 and 4 correspond to 192-bit security, and level number 5 is for 256-bit security. And this is the outcome of the first NIST call for selection and standardization of asymmetric crypto systems that are quantum safe. On the left, you can see the original name of the candidate, while on the right, we have the name of the standard algorithm that is going to be defined by NIST. We have Krista Schreiber, which has become MLChem, and which is a lattice-based key encapsulation mechanism, which is recommended by NIST for most applications. And we also have Krista's dilithium, which has become MLDSA, which is again a lattice-based algorithm, but this is for digital signatures, and it is also recommended by NIST for most applications. Then, in addition to these 2 main algorithms, also Falcon, which has become FMDSA, was standardized as another lattice-based digital signature algorithm, but this is recommended for those special applications which require short signatures. So we renounce some speed to have shorter signatures. And then also Sphinx Plus was standardized with the name SLH DSA. And Sphinx Plus is a hash-based digital signature scheme, basically exploiting the Lamport scheme with the transformations to become a many-time signature scheme. And it was recommended as a sort of conservative alternative to lattice-based schemes, because only lattice-based schemes were were still in the competition, and NIST wanted to provide some, diversity in this standardization effort. And last month, HQC, a code-based scheme as an alternative to MLChem, was added to the set of standardized algorithms to rely on a different problem with respect to lattices and to achieve a reasonable performance for general applications as well. So these are the first 5 algorithms selected and standardized by NIST in this many-year selection process. However, after 3 rounds of the first NIST call, as we have seen, all the Sinato schemes except Sphinx Plus were based on the computational hardness of lattice problems. For the case of CHEMS, there were several non-lattice based candidates still under consideration in the 4th round, while this was not the case for the Senators. No alternative was available. So in September 2022, NIST decided to open a new call for additional post-quantum digital Sinato schemes. And basically, they already had 2 Sinato schemes standardized, relying on structured lattices. So for this reason, NIST decided to focus on schemes based on some different security assumption. And in 2023, 50 submission packages were received for this second call. And 1 month later, NIST accepted 40 of these 50 candidates to enter the first round. And then in October last year, NIST selected 14 candidate algorithms to enter the second round. Among these, I highlighted Cross and Less because in these 2 I'm personally involved, but there are other 12 admitted to the second round of this second call for post-quantum algorithms. So let us slightly dive into code-based cryptography. I would like to focus on this because this is the one I'm personally involved in. As we all know, a linear code of length n and dimension k is a k-dimensional subspace of the vector space over Fq. So if we have a vector space of dimension n and a subspace of the size k, then that subspace is a code. And so we have some code length, which is the same as the size of the overall vector space. We have the code dimension, which is the same as the subspace dimension. And the redundancy is the difference between the 2, and the rate is the ratio of the code dimension over the code length. Then, as we all know, we can represent a linear code in 2 ways, basically. The code can be represented, clearly we are focusing on linear codes. There are also non-linear codes, but linear codes are those that are mostly used. We can define the code through a generator matrix G. In such a case, the code corresponds to the span of the matrix G. Or, alternatively, we can define the code as the kernel of another matrix H, which is called the parity check matrix of the code. Clearly, the 2 representations are totally equivalent. And we also define the Hamming weight the usual way, like the number of non-zero entries in a vector. Now, there are some problems in coding theory that are particularly interesting for cryptography because they are hard and they remain hard to solve even in the presence of a quantum computer. This is the general formulation of the decoding problem. So this is the general decoding problem. If I give you a code, a linear code, through the generator matrix, and I give you a noisy code word y, and they give you the maximum number of errors t, then the decoding problem is to find some string e, which basically is the error vector, having a Hamming weight smaller than or equal to the maximum number of errors t, such that if you remove the error vector you estimated from the noisy code word, then you get a code word. Hopefully you get the correct code word, but this is another story. In any case, your decoder aims to find this. And this is the so-called general decoding problem. Alternatively, we can formulate the decoding problem in the syndrome domain. So if I give you the code through the parity check matrix instead of the generator matrix, and I give you a syndrome, which is basically the result of the parity check equations, and I give you again the maximum number of errors, then you shall find an error string E with an Hamming weight which is smaller than or equal to the maximum number of errors, such that if you take your estimated error string and you compute the syndrome through the parity check matrix of the code, then you get exactly the syndrome you were looking for. Clearly, it is very easy to see that the two problems are equivalent. And the interesting part is that for the Hamming metric, the general syndrome decoding problem over a random-like code, over a general code, is NP-hard. And this was shown by Berlekamp, McElise, and Van Tilburg in 1978. And in fact, if we look for the best solver we have, for the binary case, the best solver is the information set decoding algorithm, which has a running time which indeed is exponential in the number of errors. So we don't have any efficient solver for the general decoding problem over a general code. And the even more interesting part is that if we move into the quantum domain, then we have another possible solver, which basically is the combination of the Grover algorithm with the information set decoding algorithm. This is the best known solver we have for the decoding problem in the quantum domain. But still, its complexity is exponential in the number of errors. So this is the reason why we consider code-based cryptography as a branch of post-quantum cryptography, because any solver, both in the classical domain and in the quantum domain, has exponential complexity. And this is the nice part. This is the basic motivation for code-based cryptography. Clearly, there are other choices possible. For example, SDP is also hard for different metrics like the rank metric, the Lie metric, and so on, or even other weight constraints. So instead of looking for low weight vectors, we could look for high weight vectors, and the problem still remains hard. However, to create a cryptographic trapdoor, we need another ingredient, and the other ingredient is the assumption of code indistinguishability. What do we mean? We mean that if we take a code and we represent this code with some metrics like the generator or the parity check matrix in some canonical form, for example, through Gaussian elimination, we can compute the row-reduced echelon form or any other canonical form. Then we assume, and it can be proved for some cases, that this matrix is indistinguishable from a randomly generated matrix of the same size. So basically, the idea is that I could choose a code with a nicer representation, which allows for efficient decoding. But then I hide this special representation of the code through some canonical form computation, like row-reduced echelon form. And then this becomes indistinguishable from a general code. And this is the nice part, motivating the trapdoor behind coding theory. We also introduced a further variant of the decoding problem, which is called restricted syndrome decoding problem. Basically, here we don't look for an error string with free entries, but we look for an error string with constrained weight, like in the general case, but also with another constraint. And the other constraint is that the non-zero entries of this string are not free. They must lie inside some restricted set. So we call this a restriction E, which is a subset of the set of entries of FQ, which can be more or less strict with respect to the overall set. And the restricted syndrome decoding problem is to search for error vectors which have entries lying in this restricted set. And by studying this problem, it came out that it is really interesting for cryptographic purposes because it is harder to solve. So if we look at this plot here, where we have the size of the restriction on the x-axis and the complexity on the y-axis, we see that when the restriction is small, meaning that we allow for a few values of the entries of the error vector, then the complexity is higher. While if we go with a larger restriction until the final point in which basically we have no restriction anymore, the complexity is smaller. So this is very nice because with respect to the general syndrome decoding problem, with the restricted syndrome decoding problem, we can use shorter codes, clearly. And so we have, for example, more compact keys. Another set of problems in coding theory which are particularly relevant are code equivalence problems. The general problem is the linear equivalence problem. So if I give you two codes, basically, you need to find a linear transformation between these two codes, which brings one code into the other. Then we can formulate this in linear algebra. So basically, if I give you two generator matrices, G and G prime, you shall find a base change matrix S and a monomial matrix, which is a generalized permutation matrix, basically, Q, such that if you multiply those two matrices by G on the left and on the right, then you get G prime. So this is a code equivalence. Basically, the two codes defined by G and G prime are equivalent, meaning that their code words are just reorderings of one of the other. And there is also a particular case of this LEP problem, which is called permutation equivalence problem, in which we don't allow for general permutations, but only for classical permutations, in which the entries are only 0 or 1, and this is easier to cope with, basically. And this was also proposed to be used for building code-based cryptographic schemes. Now, the pioneer in code-based cryptography was Bob McLeish, who proposed in 1978 the first asymmetric crypto system based on codes. The idea was to use the irreducible GOPA codes with a secret binary code defined as a secret GOPA code and able to correct the errors. The idea is that the number of irreducible polynomials with some given parameters is very large. And moreover, the probability that a polynomial is irreducible is not so small. And moreover, there are fast algorithms to check for irreducibility. So the key space is large and one key can be selected in a relatively fast way from the overall set of polynomials. So according to McLeish, we can create a public key encryption scheme this way. We choose a t-error correcting code C. We have some secret description of the code delta, which allows for efficient decoding, but we don't publish that one. We publish a canonical form, like a generator matrix G in a systematic form for the same code. Then, for encryption, we start from the plain text U, which is our message. We select an artificial error vector E randomly with given weight, and then we encode the message into a code word. So we multiply U by G, and we add the error vector like if it was noise, basically. For decryption, we need to decode. So only the one who knows the secret representation of the code can perform efficient decoding, and then obtains the secret message. Otherwise, if decoding fails, we have an error message. Now, following the original McLeish setting, several candidates were developed and also submitted to the NIST competition. In particular, classic McLeish, Bike, and Ledacrypt have been participating in the NIST competition, and they are basically variants of the original McLeish crypto system, using binary codes, using intentional error vectors with low Hamming weight, and following the original McLeish approach. The difference is in the type of codes. Classic McEliece uses binary GOPA codes like the original McEliece crypto system, while BIKE and LEDA use QCLDPC or QCMDPC codes that are modern codes with iterative decoders and with a quasi-cyclic structure, allowing for compact public keys. In fact, if we look at the public key size, the main drawback of the original McEliece crypto system is the very large public keys, which unfortunately made it unpractical. With BIKE and LEDA, we can reduce the public key size by a quite large amount, and we also have very fast algorithms for encryption and decryption. So let us go into the domain of digital signatures, which is basically different. We know that in a digital signature scheme, we have a signer with a secret key, publishing the corresponding public key, and then some signature sigma for any message is tied to the secret key, which in turn is tied to the public key. So on the left, we see the classical digital signature scheme. We have the signature generation on the top part, and we have the signature verification on the bottom part. An attacker shall be excluded because if the attacker tries to change the message into some message star and reuse the same signature sigma, then this will be detected by the verifier. So the verifier will use the correct public key, the correct signature, but the wrong message, and so the consistency of these three items will not result true, and the signature will be rejected. So an attacker would like to do something different, would like to ask for a signature sigma on some message match, but then the attacker will both replace the message and the signature as well. So the purpose of the attacker is to recompute a different signature sigma star for the different message star, such that the verifier will not notice this change. So using the correct public key, the verifier should check consistency of the new message and of the new signature and accept the message despite the attack. So clearly we don't want this. So we want authenticity, meaning that valid signatures can only be produced through the secret key, and also integrity, meaning that different messages require different signatures. Well, as we already mentioned, quantum computers are also a threat for signature schemes like DSA, RSA, elliptic curves, and so on. There are only a few replacements based on lattices and hash-based solutions. In principle, code-based digital signatures are quantum safe as well, but looking for efficient code-based signatures has been a very hard challenge for a long time. There are two historical proposals, the KKS scheme and the CFS scheme, following the classic approach, hash and sign. However, both these proposals were not efficient. The KKS was even attacked, and CFS has very unpractical parameters. However, a modern approach is the one following a different solution. We don't resort to hash and sign like we normally did in the past, and instead we generate the signature as the transcription of an interactive zero-knowledge identification protocol. And this second approach looks definitely more promising than the first one. So what's the problem here? Why identifying code-based signatures is so difficult? Well, the natural approach will be I follow basically the McEliece setting. So I have a secret key, which is an error correcting code. I publish a disguised matrix of this code in some canonical form. Then the signature generation shall exploit the coding. So I shall start from the message, compute some digest of the message, and then decode the digest into some low-weight error vector, which is hard to find for those who don't know the secret key. But the point is that here we have an issue. Then for verification, instead, it is very easy, because if I give you a proof, which is the error vector E with low weight, and you just need to recompute the syndrome and check that it is equal to the digest of the message, that is very easy. That is very easy. The problem is that, however, the message digest we want to decode, we try to decode, is very rarely decodable, because it is generated randomly, basically. For example, if we consider the number of possible syndromes for a finite field with Q elements and a code with redundancy R, the number of syndromes is very easy to compute, is Q to the R. Then we have distinct syndromes only for error vectors with small weight, less than or equal to T. So we can compute the number of decodable syndromes, which are distinct syndromes. And this is very easy. Is ND based on the value of T clearly changes. In general, however, if we look at particle codes, the probability to pick a decodable syndromes, which is ND divided by NS, is normally very, very small, because the total number of syndromes is huge compared to the number of decodable syndromes. So if I try to sign a message which is clearly random, I will probably pick a syndrome which is not decodable. For example, with GOPA codes, we can do some calculations which are very easy. In the end, the probability of picking a decodable syndrome is in the order of 1 divided by the factorial of the number of errors, which is extremely small. So the only solution is to keep T, the value of T, very, very small. But if we use a small t, we have a large K, a large dimension of the code. And then the public key is huge. Moreover, when we have a small t and a large K, we have a high code rate. And in the literature, it has been shown that GOPA codes with high rate are vulnerable because there are distinguishing attacks, basically. So what can we do? As I was mentioning, the two historical proposals are KKS and CFS in 1997 and 2001, but they have weak parameters and there are GOPA code distinguishers and they are unpractical. We also tried to propose a nation-signed digital signature based on codes in 2013, but it was vulnerable to statistical attacks due to some key leakage. So this problem was very hard for a long time. Moreover, in the lattice domain, Lubashevsky in 2012 introduced a very efficient scheme based on lattices. And it is basically the basis for the dilithium algorithm, which was selected by NIST. And in this case, we don't use Hessian sign, but we use the Fiat-Shamir approach, basically. And with this, we have smaller secret key, smaller public key, smaller signature size. It is definitely more efficient. Also, from the algorithmic standpoint, it is very efficient. And it was tried to be translated into the code-based domain. However, all attempts failed. We also, I was also involved in some attacks against these schemes, and all code-based schemes trying to apply the Lubashevsky approach failed, unfortunately. So what? Apparently, code-based digital signatures are very hard to achieve. However, we can look at zero-knowledge protocols. What is a zero-knowledge protocol? A zero-knowledge protocol is a very simple communication protocol in which there is one prover knowing the secret key, there is one verifier knowing the public key, and the prover needs to show the verifier that he knows the secret key without clearly communicating the secret key, but even more, without communicating any information related to the secret key. And this is called zero knowledge for this reason. So basically, the prover prepares some commitment, sends the commitment to the verifier selects some challenge, sends the challenge back to the prover, and the prover must compute a response showing that the prover knows the secret key. Clearly, the response is tied to the commitment and to the challenge. Now, however, this is an interactive protocol, so it has nothing to do with the signature. But by applying the Fiat-Shamir transform, we can transform this protocol from interactive to non-interactive. So basically here we have that the challenge is computed by the prover instead of selected by the verifier. And the challenge is computed randomly through a sort of random oracle. So basically we use a hash function using starting from the message and the commitment, and this way we select randomly the challenge. So all this preparation can be done by the prover once and for all. So the prover can compute the response starting from the commitment, from the message, computing the challenge, computing the response, and then sending the response together with the commitment only in one communication to the verifier. And then the verifier can do the same, so can recompute the challenge and verify that the response is okay. So this can become non-interactive this way. And moreover, if we associate the transcript of the protocol to the message, basically we have a digital signature. So starting from the message, the commitment, and the response, we generate a digital signature. It has all the features of a digital signature algorithm. An attacker has two ways of attacking this scheme. Or guess the correct response after choosing the message and the commitment, but this is as hard as finding the secret key, or guessing the correct commitment or challenge after choosing the message and the response. But this depends on the challenge space. If the challenge space is large enough, then the probability of attacking the system is too little for the attacker. And this was very fruitful. So in the end, we developed in the last 10 years, more or less, 3 code-based schemes. The first one is called delle. It participated into the first missed call until the second round. It provides for public key encryption and key encapsulation with indistinguishability under chosen plaintext attacks and also adaptive chosen ciphertext attacks. It was admitted to the first 2 rounds of the first NIST competition. It was not admitted to the third round due to some updates which were deemed too large by NIST. We had to avoid some weak keys, so the parameters were updated. The last release of delle is secure till now, but it is no longer in the competition. Then we developed 2 digital signature schemes, which are called less and cross, which instead are in the second competition for digital signatures. Less is a digital signature scheme based on code equivalence. It is one of the only 2 schemes based on codes that are still in the competition, and it has a very small signatures and it is reasonably fast. Cross is another digital signature scheme based on the restricted signal decoding problem. It is the other one of the only 2 schemes based on codes admitted to the competition, and this is very fast and reasonably with reasonably small signatures. So they are complementary somehow. Less as small signatures and reasonably fast. Cross is definitely more fast, but the signatures are slightly longer. And this is just to give you an idea for signatures of the overall picture. If we look here, we have RSA, which is the light blue cross, and we also have EDDSA, which is the black cross, and they have relatively small public keys and relatively small signatures. In particular, EDDSA has extremely small public keys and signatures. All the candidates of the first NIST standardization process have worse performance. As you see here, both the Lithium, Falcon, and the Sphinx have bigger public keys and bigger signatures. If we look at the additional call for post-quantum signatures, the on-ramp ones, then the situation becomes better. As you see here, there are candidates that have small public keys, including Cross. For example, Cross has very small public keys, even if the signature is larger, or very small signatures, as you see in this picture. So we are slowly approaching the performance of widespread signature schemes. with this second selection process by list. Okay, in this final part of the tutorial, let us quickly speak about the transition to post-quantum cryptography. So until now, we spoke about the primitives. And you know, defining the algorithms is the first step. But this is only the first step, because then we want to use this algorithm and to make the transition to these algorithms of all the systems we use today. And for this, we need to have a secure and efficient hardware and software implementations of these primitives. And moreover, we need to integrate them into existing systems and protocols for the security of data. And data may be at rest, for example, stored in our cloud systems, or in transit. They can be transmitted across networks, or they can be in use. We can do computations with data, and we need to preserve the security of data even during computations. And the point is, when do we need to make this transition? Because we know that a quantum computer large enough to attack quantum vulnerable crypto systems is not available for the moment. But introducing post-quantum cryptography will take time. And moreover, there are some systems we use today that will remain vulnerable even in the future. Because, for example, we need to put them in orbit. And if we put cryptography in orbit, it will remain there for many years. Or there may be store now, decrypt later attacks. So if I am an attacker, I could store all the internet traffic today for some subjects I want to attack, and then I can wait for a large enough quantum computer to be available to attack those data later on. Moreover, in the transition stage, we need to do hybrid use of traditional cryptography and post-quantum cryptography, because post-quantum cryptography is relatively new. So some new attack may be found, and then we shall rely on traditional cryptography. On the other hand, we need post-quantum cryptography for the quantum attacks. So if we expect a quantum computer large enough to be available in 2035, we need to start the transition now. And what are the problems? Well, the problems are the size of the public keys, of the signatures, of the ciphertext, which is bigger. Another problem is the computational cost, because we need more complex problems than the traditional mathematical problems we used in asymmetric cryptography. We need more operations. We need more expensive resources for executing these algorithms. And also time, because we need more time for generating keys, for encryption, for decryption, and for generating signatures and verifying signatures. What happens on networks? Well, on networks, we have some impact. Definitely. We need more network traffic because we have increased key size and signatures. We have less performing nodes because we need more computational capacity. And we also need more time because in the handshake will be longer than before. And so we have some impact. Moreover, we need backward compatibility because we have existing systems and we cannot rule them out right now. So we need to provide for compatibility. And moreover, we need the hybrid approach for defending both against future quantum attacks, but also current attacks. Well, on the one hand, the impact on famous protocols like TLS and SSH is already under study. But there are many other protocols that are critical to network security, which still need to be studied, analyzed, and upgraded. For example, we are working a lot on satellite communications, which indeed need to be updated as soon as possible because these systems are in orbit and they cannot be updated later on. In addition, they have some special constraints, for example, the limited channel capacity compared to terrestrial networks, the limited computational resources, because we cannot have powerful hardware in satellite systems compared to ground-based systems. And moreover, we have the round trip time, which is very long, so the latency is higher than traditional networks. And moreover, we have energy consumption issues because satellite systems have little energy available. And so there is a lot to do for transition to post-quantum cryptography in these systems. One promising approach is the so-called hybrid approach, in which we basically combine traditional cryptography with post-quantum cryptography, and we use them both joined together. And this enables a smooth transition to post-quantum cryptography, for example, using combiners. What is a combiner? It's an algorithm receiving as input the post-quantum key material, the traditional key material, or even others, and then combining them all together, giving an output which encompasses all the cryptographic primitives selected to be combined together. And this is a logical solution for many systems. But there are custom cases that need to be studied. For example, as I was mentioning, the transition to post-quantum cryptography for the most common security protocols like TLS, IPsec is already ongoing. There are some libraries, there are some open source projects, and the whole community is focused on those protocols. But there are plenty of other uses of classical cryptography that are exposed to quantum attacks, and they are very custom. For example, if we look at 5G plus networks, they use TLS, they use widespread security protocols. But in addition to this, they also use custom techniques, for example, for user anonymization or other functions. And they are based on quantum vulnerable cryptography like elliptic curves. So they need to be upgraded. This picture, for example, concerns the user anonymization in 5G and beyond networks. So as you know, we computed this concealed identifier, SUCI, which replaces the IMSI in the public network to provide for user anonymity. And this is computed starting from the IMSI by using asymmetric encryption and signature generation based on elliptic curves. So we combine two key pairs for the home network and for the device. One of those is used for encryption, the public key of the network. The other one is used for a signature, for authentication of the user. And then this concealed identifier is used for registering to the network. And then inside the network, it can be used for recovering the IMSI by using the corresponding keys, so the private key of the network and the public key of the device. But this uses elliptic curve cryptography, which is vulnerable to quantum computer attacks. So this needs to be upgraded as well. So to conclude, I just want to acknowledge some projects we are involved in at Marche Polytechnic University. The first 4 projects are funded by Moore, and the last 3 projects are funded by the European Space Agency, clearly involving space communications and their transition to post-quantum cryptography. As a last thing, I would like to mention August Kerckhoff, who was a very important cryptographer, who wrote in the 18th century, was already able to wrote this statement concerning ciphers for secret correspondence, saying that it's not enough to have a cipher for secret correspondence. It must also present serious guarantees of indecipherability. And this is the weak point in most of the systems devised to date. And where this major flaw has been eliminated, we find ourselves in the presence of equally serious practical disadvantages. Basically, this is the same situation in which we are with post-quantum cryptography. We need the post-quantum cryptography for defending our systems against new attacks that are on the horizon. But putting post-quantum cryptography into practice brings some effort. So we need to face such an effort. There is much work that has already been done, but there is also a lot of work to do. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our speaker. And now we'd like to thank also who will listen to the editorial online.